Hey everybody, welcome to today's video. What I'm going to show you today is how to convert your 1996 to 2004 Ford to a slot style mass airflow sensor. If you're watching this video, chances are you know why you'd want to do that, but for those of you that might not be familiar, there are a couple of reasons you might want to do this. First of all, if you're looking to make more power out of your vehicle, the factory mass airflow sensors are kind of limited in the power that they can support, and what tends to happen is you max out that sensor rather quickly. And on top of that, the more modern sensors that are available today react faster to changes in airflow and make tuning easier. All right, so it sounds simple enough. Just swap out one sensor for the other and you're good to go, right? Well, that's not right. So the problem is that you have two different footprints here that these different sensors take up. On your 96 to 2004 Ford, typically going to have something that looks like this with this style plug. The newer style sensors have a much smaller footprint and their plug style is like this. So you can't just bolt one in place of the other. So that presents two problems. The first problem is you have a different footprint with the new sensor. So what you end up having to have is a custom housing. You can usually pick these up that have the proper pattern for the new slot sensor. And then the other problem is wiring. Your original factory wiring is going to have a plug that looks something like this. However, the new sensor uses a plug that looks like this. So mainly what I'm going to focus on today is to show you how to go ahead and convert that and make a little custom harness to make that work for you. All right, so let's talk about the different pinouts of these two style plugs. First, we'll start with the factory wiring. So whenever you're looking at the plug from this direction, pin 1 is going to start here on the left, and you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, typically, all of these 96 to 2004 vehicles only use 4 of these pins, and the outer two, 1 and 6, are actually blank. Okay, so now I've noticed, across most of the Ford vehicles, at least all the ones that I've looked at, the color coding on these wires seems to be pretty consistent. But I wouldn't concentrate too much on the wire color. What's most important here is the actual pins themselves and what they connect to on the mass airflow sensor. So we're going to go over right now is that pin out, and I'll also put this up on the screen for you to look at too. But pin 2, the second one from the left, is going to be our 12-volt power. Pin 3 is our mass airflow sensor ground. Pin 4 is our mass airflow sensor return. Pin 5 is going to be our mass airflow signal to the PCM, and then pin 6, as I mentioned earlier, is not used. Now onto the slot MAF plug. Now you'll see here that they actually do have 6 wires on these newer ones, and the reason for that is that the newer vehicles had an integrated intake air temperature sensor into the mass airflow sensor. And so likely your slot MAF that you're going to put into your vehicle is also going to have that. Now it's up to you if you want to use that. You're free to use your existing intake air temperature sensor if you can, but you also have the option on most of these aftermarket sensors to use the intake air temperature sensor that comes with. Okay, so when looking at the plug-in on this one, pin 1 is actually the furthest on the right, and then you go 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 as you go across to the left. Now as far as the actual pinout, and again I'll put this on the screen for you to look at too, pins 1 and 2 are for that intake air temperature sensor that I mentioned earlier. Pin 3 is your mass airflow sensor output. Pin 4 is your mass airflow sensor return, ground. And pin 5 is a chassis ground. And then pin 6 is your 12-volt power supply. Also, as far as this slot MAF plug, you can get these in a couple of different places. There are companies out there that sell these plug-ins, or you could just go to the junkyard and try to get one from a vehicle that's in a junkyard from a newer vehicle. For the Ford applications, it's going to be 2005 and newer. You can actually already buy these harnesses made up too, most likely for your application. The problem there is going to be more expensive. So if you want to save a few bucks, you can do what I'm doing here and just make your own. All right, so let's go ahead and get this made up. What I'm going to do first, I'm going to go ahead and cut the wire that I need from my existing harness. Now my particular vehicle had another plug-in in the factory harness and I was able to disconnect it. That might not be the case for yours. So what you're going to do in that case is go ahead and cut your factory wiring somewhere, upstream of the plug that plugged into your mass airflow sensor previously. Make sure to leave enough length for wherever your new mass airflow sensor is going to be, especially if it's not going to be in the same location that it is now. In my case, I don't really have to worry about that. My sensor is actually closer to this than it was before, so I'm not going to make this harness very long. All right, so what we'll start with first is our 12-volt power wire. That was pin 2 on our factory wiring, which was, in my case, was a red wire. So that's going to be this wire here. So let's go ahead and strip that out. And that's going to connect to pin 6 on the slot MAF wiring, which in this case, this piece that I have here, this aftermarket harness plug, that's also red. So we'll strip that one out as well. Okay, So I'm going to use crimp connectors. I highly recommend that if you use these, you use some sort of heat shrink connector that you can heat and shrink the ends at the end. That'll keep moisture from getting into your wiring. You can also solder these if you want. I tend not to solder any connections in the engine bay due to the heat cycling that the engine bay experiences, going from cold to hot temperatures. In my experience, that tends to accelerate any sort of stress cracks in solder joints. So in my case here, I'm going to stick with these types of crimps. Okay, so there's that one. I'll go ahead and take my torch here and heat that up to shrink that heat shrink. All right, so next we're going to do pin 3 on our factory wiring, which was, in my case here, it's a black and white wire. That wire is going to go to pin number 5 on the slot MAF wiring, which in our case, in mine here right now, it's black. Again, I wouldn't pay too much attention to colors. Just make sure you're getting the correct pins to pins on the other plugs. All right, so next we're going to have pin 4 on our factory wiring, which is the mass airflow sensor return signal. And that's going to go to pin 4 on the slot MAF plug. All right, so next we have one more wire left on my factory wiring here, which is a blue and light red, or light blue and red, I should say. And that's going to go to pin 3 on our slot MAF plug. All right, so that's all of the main wires that we were going to have from our factory wiring. Now, like I mentioned earlier, these slot MAFs typically have an integrated intake air temperature sensor. So that's what these 2 wires here are for. In my case, like I said, I'm not going to use that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and just strip these and put 2 crimps on the end of it. And then we'll tie those back in our harness here when we put loom on it, so those will be out of the way and protected. All right, so we're all done wiring. What we need to do now is just go ahead and make this neater. So what I'll do is go ahead and get some loom here, and we'll get this wire in the loom, tape it up, and it'll make it look real nice. All right, so we're pretty much all set. One thing I am going to do is I'm going to go ahead and check this, point to point, check this from one end to the other. I probably should have did that before I taped this up, but right now we'll go ahead and do that and make sure that we're wired correctly. All right, so something else to keep in mind is that these sensors are not going to be plug and play compatible, especially with your factory ECU or even a standalone computer for that matter. So you will have to have a custom tune made to make these work correctly. Assuming you're already working on something to get more power out of your vehicle as it is, you're already going to be doing that. So it'll be just some other part of the process that your tuner will have to do to make this work correctly. So as I mentioned earlier, there are aftermarket companies that do make ready-made harnesses like this that are just plug and play compatible. The problem there is you are going to pay more for them. I think they're typically going to run you 30 or 40 bucks. So if you are able to go to a junkyard and get one of these slot MAF plug ends off of a newer vehicle and get it for very cheaply, you can do this sort of conversion here for next to nothing. All right, everybody, that's all I have for today's video. I hope it was helpful. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.